Hi all. Today we'll look at a few improvements that were introduced in Java from JDK 8. JDK 8 is more kind of an watershed moment in Java, wherein a lot of improvements were done and new changes were introduced, keeping in line with the recent changes in the programming world. We have seen that traditionally um, Java is more kind of a verbose language wherein we need to write uh, quite some amount of boilerplate code and other code in order to get the things done. Implement a few items and implement the logic and other things. Okay, so whereas coming to the latest programming languages that were introduced, they were little more little less verbose when compared to Java. So in order to catch up with all those new languages and to bring some modernity into the language, into Java language, a few improvements were done from JDK 8. And as part of that, from JDK 8 and subsequent releases onwards, it's decided that there will be 6 month release cycle, a release train and release cycle was decided, wherein every 6 months new changes will be added as and when they are done, and then that will help in improving the language on an overall level. And an LTS version will be released from time to time so that the applications can be migrated to the latest LTS version within given time, within some amount of time, so that we'll be able to move forward and utilize the best of those improvements that are available. So today we will look at one such improvement, the what which is a Lambda introduction to Java. So if we see lambdas in Java are inspired from lambda calculus, okay, which is a formal system in mathematical logic, okay, and this is primarily used in expressing computation and is based on an function abstraction and application using variable binding and substitution. So basically, whenever we wanted to write some computation tasks with abstracting them using the functions and applying and application of those functions by binding the variables and substituting them into the subsequent functions. Okay, so in order to achieve all these things, it was introduced in um, it was introduced traditionally in mathematics. So the same concepts were introduced in Java as well. Okay, so because this primarily introduces anonymous nature with less amount of code that is needed for that. Okay, so let us see how this will improve the code quality and the code readability and reduce the verbosity of the language. Okay, let us say we have a um, we have a list of array of integers. Okay, so array of integers or array of strings, okay, or let us say simple function or some um, yeah, let us define a simple interface. Okay, so I okay, whose only function is to just test me. Okay, this is just a simple interface with a simple abstract method, and this abstract method doesn't has any implementation with it. Now let us say we find a reason to implement a method of its interface. Okay, so let us say I have to create an object of interface of type interface I. Okay, however, if I have to implement an object, if you have to create an object of interface I, there are two approaches for this. Okay, first approach is to create a of class by implementing I. This is the first approach, the traditional approach. The second approach is create a anonymous implement implementation of I. So in a first approach, we have to go ahead and create a separate class which implements I and does the rest of the things as needed. In the second approach, we need not create an custom class, code a custom class. However, we can just create an anonymous implementation of I. So we are more interested in the second portion, which is creating an anonymous implementation of I. Okay, so if we see here, for implementing the anonymous implementation of I, we have to implement the test me method system. Let us say I'm just going to print a text. Okay, now we can run this method. Let us run this method and check out. So if we see this, so there is a test me method which was implemented. Okay, and accordingly we can see the implementation here as well, right? So this is the traditional approach. Now let us take a little detour and look at the mm, Lambda approach. Okay, now if we see, we are going to invoke the lambda.testMe method. So if we see here, we might go with the assumption that it will throw an exception. Okay, but let us run this and see. So if we see here, um, there are two lines that were displayed. One is the traditional usage and the other one is the lambda usage. So the traditional usage is something that is written as part of the anonymous implementation, and lambda usage is the one that was written for lambda way of implementation. Now if we see, okay, the amount of code that was written, okay, to create an object of type I, okay, and compare it to lambda approach. In lambda approach, everything is completed in one single method, sorry, one single line. Okay, whereas the same was implemented in 6 lines, right? So this is just a simple implementation of system out statements. So it has almost reduced by 6 times. The number of lines of implementation has reduced by 6 times. So in this way, rather going with the traditional approach, using the lambda approach helps us in reducing the amount of lines of code that we need to write. Now let us say we might even go with, let us go a little extent, and let us implement, just go with this. Okay, now in this one, and okay, here I'm going to implement length, and I'm going to square it. Okay, now a similar implementation in here will be similar implementation will be okay. Sorry. Let's change this as well with the same. Okay. Okay. Now let us run this and check. Okay, so if we see here, right, this is just a simple implementation of calculation wherein it has to return an integer. Now, if we see here in the traditional implementation, we still need to implement all the logic, right? This boilerplate code is still needed, okay, with the exact return types and everything. Okay, whereas coming to the Lambda approach, if we see in the Lambda approach, sorry, okay, in the Lambda approach, further, okay, in the Lambda approach, we are just passing the parameter, okay, even though it's an it's not defined, even though if the type of the parameter is not defined, it is inferred, okay, because when it refers to this Lambda method of type I, okay, it invokes the uh, abstract method, single abstract method that is present in the test me, and it will pass on this implementation to this test me method, so that the input that we are passing in here in the Lambda is invoked as of type string, and accordingly we'll be able to see the changes in here, see the availability of methods of that type in here. Okay, so in this way, we Lambda is going to reduce the amount of lines of code that we are going to write tremendously. Okay, now if we have to use something of this type in Lambda, okay, we can only use it with interfaces, that too of type functional interfaces. Okay, and a functional interface can be a functional interface type can have only one abstract method. It cannot have multiple abstract method. Okay, it doesn't allow it. It can have only one abstract method, exactly one abstract method. Okay, so so only a functional interface can be used in writing a Lambda, and a functional interface can have only one abstract method. Now, if we see here, let us say if we provide a default implementation, then once again see. So even though there is no implementation in abstract me, it is not abstract anymore, right? These are default methods. Okay, default methods in interface I. So since there is only one abstract method, okay, we could write a Lambda and apply this Lambda onto this type. Okay, so this is how Lambdas can be written and invoked. Okay, so there are various default Lambda implementations, functional interface implementations within JDK, which are introduced in JDK 8. That those are functions by functions, predicates by predicates, and consumers by consumers and supplier. Okay, these are of various functional interface types. So we will discuss further about these functional interface types provided in JDK in the next session. If you have any queries, questions regarding these lambdas, please post it in the comments section. Thank you.